Welcome to the Wednesday Vespers of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Pottstown. Glad you could be with us this evening. I'm Rev. Dave Hunter, and with me here is Rev. Carrie Muller. We're the Fellowship's ministers. This service will be somewhat about rivers and somewhat autobiographical, with the theme, There's a River Flowing in My Soul. We start, as is our tradition, by lighting the chalice.
A chalice lit in our midst is a symbol of our liberal faith, a faith built on the foundations of freedom, reason, and welcome, a faith sustained by acts of kindness and justice, a faith that envisions the world flourishing with no one left out, a faith that inspires the living out of goodness, a faith that requires thoughtfulness and compassion, a faith of wholeness and integrity. This tiny flame, virtual though it is the symbol of the spark of all this within each of us. These are the words from Deborah Falk.
Where there is love, where people care for one another, surely the holy is there as well. May this, wherever you are, be a holy place. May we, all of us, be a blessing to the world.
We will begin and perhaps end with the words of the ancient Greek pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus. Potamoi, gar uk estin embanai dis aut. No one ever steps into the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and they're not the same person.
There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my soul. Until February of 5th grade, my family lived in Pleasant Ridge, a very small suburb a couple of miles north of Detroit. It was a pleasant place to live. I don't recall any ridges in the town, and that's a question I'd never thought of until now. And there were no rivers there. If you looked at a map, you would wonder why a separate town of Pleasant Ridge existed. It looks like it should be a corner of the neighboring larger town of Ferndale. Pleasant Ridge was incorporated in 1919. My guess is that the real estate developers wanted something more upscale than the primarily working class Ferndale. No rivers, but just a short walk from our house, we had Woodward Avenue, the primary spoke radiating out from downtown Detroit. I remember the streetcars gradually cut back and then discontinued altogether. Parallel to Woodward Avenue and just a short walk in the other direction was the Grand Trunk Railroad, whose commuter trains took my father to his job in downtown Detroit and brought him back home again at the end of the day. The City Commission of Pleasant Ridge now has a Black member. In 1950, you couldn't have found a Black resident, let alone a commission member. Let's pause here for the words of the hymn by Richard Chenevix's Trench, Make Channels for the Streams of Love.
Make channels for the streams of love where they may broadly run, and love has overflowing streams to fill them, every one. But if at any time we cease such channels to provide, the very founts of love for us will soon be parched and dried. For we must share if we would keep this gift above else all. We cease to give, we cease to have. Such is the law of love.
We may have not had a river in Pleasant Ridge, but my grandparents did. My father's parents lived in Lansing, about 2 hours away. To enter Lansing, you had to cross the Grand River, which flowed west from Lansing through the city of Grand Rapids to Lake Michigan. My father's cousin, Howard Hunter, bought land outside of town in 1934 so he could have an apple orchard. The land bordered on the Grand River, and the land along the river is now Hunter Orchard Park. My mother's parents lived on a farm in Connecticut, a farm that had been in my grandmother's family for more than 100 years. And the farm remains in the family today, though I wouldn't call it a farm anymore. The farm borders on the Willimantic River with a railroad track along the river on the other side. We visited for a week or two every summer when I was young. Walks to the river and along the river are among my many memorable activities of our time there.
And now let us pause for a brief musical interlude, the tune Germany by Lowell Mason. It's number 403 in our hymnal.
Churches in all three places were important in my life in those early years. Our family was part of the local Drayton Avenue Presbyterian Church in Ferndale, just a block or two outside of Pleasant Ridge. My father was involved in church leadership, especially on the financial side. One incident from Sunday school stuck in my mind all these years. The Sunday school teacher asked us, if you could have one wish, what would it be? I didn't even think of bicycles or ponies, but responded, world peace. My Lansing grandparents helped start a new Presbyterian church, more convenient than the downtown church. It was not more than 100 feet from their house, which is now a parking lot. My Lansing cousins, those of my generation, are still leaders in that congregation. My Connecticut grandparents were members of the Congregational Church in Tolland. On the weekend of our annual family reunion in Connecticut, we sometimes attend that church. Sometimes we attend the Congregational Church in Ellington, my mother's childhood church, across the street from the cemetery where my grandparents and other family members are buried. And sometimes we attend the UU Church in Vernon, where for a number of years the minister was our former ministerial intern at our UU Church in Arlington, Virginia. And sometimes on those reunion Sundays, we don't go to church at all. I hope we can hold a reunion next year. This year's was canceled. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul. And it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my soul. In February of 1953, we moved from Pleasant Ridge to Birmingham, from a lower middle class neighborhood to an upper middle class neighborhood, to a house in a subdivision with the name Quarton Lake Estates. Quarton Lake, created by a dam on the Rouge River, was just a couple of blocks away. Why the river had been dammed, I do not know. I attended Quarton Elementary School. Quarton Market was within walking distance. Quarton Road was 3 blocks to the north. Dr. Quarton and his family lived across the street and down a few houses. Buddy Quarton was my age, but he attended Holy Name School. Just a few blocks from our house was the Presbyterian Church and also the Methodist and Lutheran churches. The Presbyterians had recently moved from an older, smaller building in downtown Birmingham, which then became the Congregational Church. My father explained that we would wait to switch churches until fall. He had just been through a capital fund drive at the Drayton Avenue Church. And he didn't want to be greeted by another one at our new church. Birmingham Unitarian Church in neighboring Bloomfield Hills would open later in the decade. I'll interrupt my story for another short reading, the words of Tagore.
The same stream of life that runs through my veins night and day runs through the world and dances in rhythmic measures. It is the same life that shoots in joy through the dust of the earth in numberless blades of grass and breaks into tumultuous waves of leaves and flowers. It is the same life that is rocked in ocean cradle of birth and death in ebb and flow. I feel my limbs are made glorious by the touch of this world of life, and my pride is from the life throb of ages, dancing in my blood this moment.
To facilitate through traffic flow around downtown Birmingham, a bypass had been created sometime in the past. Its name was Hunter Boulevard, named after early settlers who were not related to my family. At least 3 of my high school classmates were people I had known in Pleasant Ridge or Ferndale. And we had neighbors on our street in Birmingham who had been neighbors on our street in Pleasant Ridge. Their children were a few years younger than I. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul. And it's asking me, am I somebody? There's a river flowing in my soul. Skipping over college and law school in Lake Carnegie and the Charles River, my next 17 years were in Washington, D.C., an apartment practically across the street from the Capitol Hill Presbyterian Church. Then a house shared with 5 others, a couple of short blocks from the National and Memorial Universalist Church. And after that, 5 different residences within walking distance of All Souls Unitarian Church. I never attended worship at any of these churches during that era. While living in the neighborhood of All Souls, I also lived not far from Rock Creek Park, and thus Rock Creek, which flowed north to south through the district, emptying into the Potomac River. A bike path followed the creek. I used that path some of the time for commuting to the Department of Justice and more of the time for recreation on weekends. When Carrie and I and her children, Amanda and David, became a family, my 1-bedroom apartment was insufficient. We bought a house at Lake Barcroft, Northern Virginia. The lake was created in 1915 with a dam on Holmes Run to serve as a reservoir for the city of Alexandria. When it was no longer needed as a reservoir, it became the central and defining feature of a residential development with swimming and boating. For a couple of decades, I enjoyed, in the summer, swimming after work and on weekends. Just a few miles from our home, in neighboring Arlington County, was 4 Mile Run, a tributary to the Potomac River. Along 4 Mile Run was a bike path where I could be frequently found on Saturdays. I also bicycled to church, Unitarian, now the UU Church of Arlington, weather permitting. I went early for choir practice. The rest of the family came later by car. Amanda and David are active UUs today.
And now let us pause for another brief musical interlude, the hymn tune Rest by Frederick Charles Maker. It's number 274.
With the nest empty and with Carrie ordained and serving the UU Fellowship in Finksburg, Maryland, we moved to a new townhouse development, Foxhall Farm in Catonsville, Maryland. From there, Carrie could get to the church in about half an hour, and I had easy access to a commuter train to Washington, D.C. My Justice Department office was a short walk from Union Station. About 50 feet from our Foxhall Farm front door was the border of Patapsco Valley State Park, which ran for many miles along the Patapsco River on its way to the Chesapeake Bay. Our section of the park had numerous hiking trails. I spent many hours on those trails. Now the concluding verse of what I hope is a familiar hymn, Prayer for This House, by Louis Untermeyer.
With laughter drown the raucous shout, And though these sheltering walls are thin, may they be strong to keep hate out and hold love in.
When Carrie was called to be the minister of the Delaware County UU Church in Media, Pennsylvania, almost 20 years ago, we moved into a new, not quite completed townhouse development with the name The Mills at Rose Valley. It was on the site of an old mill, though there was now barely a trace of the mill left. As you would expect, it was next to a river, Ridley Creek, its source of power. Our house was one of the ones that backed up directly to the river. There was a footbridge across the river and a pedestrian path along the river, but my explorations never went very far in either direction. We lived there until 2006, when we left the East for our 5-year adventure in Arkansas. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul. And it's asking me, am I somebody? There's a river flowing in my soul. When we retired as the co-ministers of the UU Fellowship of Fayetteville, Arkansas, we returned to the Philadelphia area. Our new home was at Oak Knoll, a townhouse development in Berwyn, adjacent to US 30 and what was once the main line of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Darby Creek has its source at Oak Knoll, with several storm sewers emptying into a pond created by a dam. The creek that flows below the dam runs through the Cat Preserve, the wooded area through which I would walk to get from Oak Knoll to the local YMCA. We left Oak Knoll a couple of years ago to move to a retirement community, White Horse Village, which is adjacent to the Ridley Creek State Park. Since I discovered a convenient informal entrance to the park a few months ago, I've been going there for hikes frequently. So now we live just a few miles upstream from where we had lived several years earlier. One stretch of my usual trail in the park is along Ridley Creek, with a steep tree-covered bank between stream and trail. I've yet to see a canoe or other vessel on the water. Someday, maybe I'll try to walk along the stream from our present home to the old one, or maybe not.
And now, another familiar hymn tune for you, Finlandia by John Sibelius. Heraclitus taught us, no one ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and they're not the same person.
But I say unto you, it is the same river, the very same river, and you are the same person forever. There's a river flowing to the sea. There's a river flowing to the sea. And it's telling me it's a one-way ride. There's a river flowing to the sea.
And we extinguish this flame, but not the light of wisdom, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and in our hands until we are together again.
16 years ago, we were visiting in Lansing on a Sunday in August. We went to the family church, and Cousin Judy introduced me to the pastor she introduced me as a minister. He asked me if I would give the benediction at the end of the service. I could hardly say no. This is what I came up with on the back of the order of service. May you know peace and joy. May you live in a world of love and justice. May your lives be a testament to your faith and a blessing to the world. May you recognize Christ in the stranger. May the love of God be with you until you meet again in all the days of your life. Amen. And now the threefold amen.
And amen.
Now you can have coffee or whatever.